A simple German prisoner stepped off a ship in America, and what he saw would forever change his understanding of the world. June 4, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. German petty officer Herman Butcher, a mid-ranking soldier in the Nazi army, gripped the ship's railing tightly as he walked down the gangway. His legs barely responded after 14 days crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Through the morning fog, he witnessed something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. American dock workers, both white and black, worked side by side with machinery that looked like it came from the future. Women in work overalls operated giant cranes. Children sold newspapers by the gates. No one fled at the sight of enemy uniforms. Butcher whispered to the man behind him that the Americans were insane. This German soldier would later document that moment in his memoirs, a book titled Behind the Barbed Wire, published in Germany in 1952. It became one of the most detailed accounts of the lives of prisoners of war in America. The Norfolk Naval Base sprawled over more than 1,700 hectares, with docks that vanished into the horizon and cranes loading and unloading dozens of ships at once. In a single morning, this one port moved more cargo than the port of Hamburg, the largest in Germany, in an entire week. But it wasn't the industrial scale that stunned the arriving prisoners. It was the normalcy. Civilians walked freely near military facilities. Vendors offered coffee and donuts within sight of warships. A marching band played popular songs at a nearby rally to sell war bonds. 2,500 veterans from Rommel S. Afrika Korps, the famous German army that had fought in North Africa, were now standing on American soil. It was the first major group of what would become 425,000 German prisoners held in the United States by the end of the war. What these German soldiers would witness in the following months wasn't just American abundance. That story had been told before. They would see something far more unsettling to the military mind. A nation at war that refused to act like it. A society so secure in its power that it treated its mortal enemies like troublesome houseguests. And a people whose strange customs and inexplicable behavior would prove more destructive to Nazi ideology than any battlefield defeat. Processing at Norfolk began with what Butcher would later describe in his memoirs as the first impossibility. German military doctrine, from Poland to France and Africa, held that prisoners were assets to exploit or burdens to minimize. The Geneva Convention, the international agreement governing the treatment of prisoners of war, was respected when convenient and ignored when not. Yet here, American officers read the Geneva rules in fluent German, explaining rights and asking about dietary needs. According to International Red Cross records from June 1943, Jewish American military personnel, including several sergeants with clearly Jewish surnames, distributed Red Cross packages while explaining that kosher meals prepared according to Jewish religious law were available for any Jewish prisoner. Several Wehrmacht soldiers, the name of the German army at the time, laughed nervously, assuming it was mockery. It wasn't. The American army had arranged religious dietary accommodations for its enemies. The medical examinations defied all military logic. Wounded German prisoners received the same penicillin, the miracle drug barely available in German field hospitals, that American soldiers did. A Swiss Red Cross inspector named Guy Matreux noted in his July 1943 report that the medical treatment provided to German prisoners equaled or surpassed that given to U.S. military personnel. Prisoners expressed disbelief at the quality of care. African American medical staff served in integrated units at Norfolk, though not across the entire army. One documented case involved a black medical technician drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine health tests. In Germany, such racial contact was legally forbidden. Here, it was military routine. The most incomprehensible image came during their first meal. The German prisoners were taken to a mess hall where American sailors were eating. The two groups, enemies who had been trying to kill each other in convoy battles, ate in the same facility. Americans at one end, Germans at the other, sharing the same food lines, the same quality meals. The Americans showed no particular interest, more focused on a live baseball broadcast than on their enemies sitting 50 feet away. The 3-day train journey to the inland camps brought the next level of mental confusion. Unlike the secret prisoner movements in Germany, American authorities made no attempt to hide their prisoners of war. The trains weren't freight cars, but real passenger coaches with cushioned seats. They stopped at regular stations where civilians gathered to watch. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., witnessed by hundreds of people and documented in station records from June 1943, the German prisoners saw American families sending off soldiers to training camps. Wives kissed their husbands in public. Children waved flags. Teenagers shared milkshakes at the station restaurant. The same platform held enemies and families, separated only by windows and guards who seemed more interested in directing traffic than watching prisoners. The trains passed through industrial areas that should have been camouflaged, hidden, protected. Instead, factories displayed their names in huge letters. The Glenn L. Martin aircraft plant in Baltimore had parking lots visible from the train, full of workers' personal cars. The prisoners could count the B-26 bombers, a type of medium attack aircraft, lined up for delivery. No attempt at concealment, no security paranoia, just American industry operating in full view of its enemies. Through Pennsylvania, the trains passed coal mines and steel mills running around the clock. The night sky glowed orange from the blast furnaces that never stopped. Workers' homes, individual houses with gardens, not barracks, spread for miles around each industrial complex. Electric lights burned in every window. Radio antennas sprouted from every roof. At a stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, recorded in railroad logs, German officers watched American workers changing shifts, men carrying lunchboxes, wearing leather shoes and wristwatches, driving personal vehicles. According to Butcher's memoirs, one worker threw away a half-eaten apple and opened a fresh one from his lunchbox. The casual waste of food by a laborer astonished officers who had seen their men fight over scraps in Africa. Camp Hearn in Texas opened in December 1942 on nearly 300 hectares near the town of Hearn in Robertson County. Military records show it would house up to 4,800 German prisoners under conditions that surpassed what most had known as civilians. The camp's construction and operation are extensively documented in U.S. Army Corps of Engineers records and War Department files held at the National Archives. The infrastructure itself defied the German understanding of prisoner treatment. Wooden barracks with electric lights, not oil lamps, indoor plumbing with working toilets and hot water heaters in every building, individual beds with mattresses, sheets, and blankets instead of straw sacks, recreation halls with ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and libraries. A Swiss inspector named Emil Sandstrom noted in his August 1943 report that conditions at Camp Hearn not only exceeded Geneva Convention requirements, but also surpassed the living standards many of these men had experienced in Germany. The camp's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecile Stiles, whose service record is preserved in military archives, addressed the arriving prisoners in German. He had studied the language at university before the war. He explained the camp rules, but also something unprecedented. The prisoners would largely govern themselves within the compounds. They would elect spokesmen, organize activities, and manage their own schedules within military requirements. Self-government for enemies seemed like weakness or a trap. The camp hospital, inspected monthly by the International Red Cross, contained equipment that many German civilian hospitals lacked: X-ray machines, operating rooms, dental chairs, and pharmaceutical supplies, including the new wonder drug, penicillin. When prisoner Georg Gärtner, who would later become famous as the last German POW to surrender in 1985, developed appendicitis in September 1943, he received surgery within hours. The operation was performed by Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, assisted by captured German medical staff. But nothing prepared them for the camp canteen, a store where prisoners could buy goods using coupons earned through voluntary labor: cigarettes, chocolate, soap, writing materials, musical instruments, art supplies. The War Department authorized these sales, documented in Quartermaster Corps records, believing that small comforts would keep prisoner morale high and reduce escape attempts. The idea that enemy prisoners could shop, could make choices, could have options beyond survival bewildered the military mind. By September 1943, severe labor shortages led to the employment of prisoners throughout Texas. The War Manpower Commission, in coordination with the Office of the Provost Marshal General, authorized POW labor in agriculture and non-military industries. Prisoners earned 80 cents per day in canteen coupons, the same base pay as American privates. Detailed records of these work programs exist in the National Archives. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German prisoners of war encountered American agriculture on a scale beyond European comprehension. The ranch covered more than 330,000 hectares, larger than the state of Rhode Island. Ranch records from 1943 to 1945 show that German prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American cowboys and some black ranch hands in cattle operations. The racial mix in the workforce, though socially limited, contradicted Nazi racial hierarchy theories. The prisoners documented their astonishment at the mechanization in letters that passed military censorship. A single combine harvester replaced dozens of workers. Trucks, not horse-drawn carts, moved crops. The ranch even used airplanes, small civilian aircraft, to monitor cattle herds and locate strays. The ranch foreman, Richard Kleberg Jr., treated the German prisoners more like temporary employees than enemies, according to ranch employment records. At cotton gins across Texas, including documented operations in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, prisoners witnessed processing speeds impossible by European standards. The Hearn cottonseed oil plant, which employed POW labor from August 1943 to December 1945, processed more cotton in one day than German textile mills in a month. Yet workers took regular breaks, ate full lunches, and listened to radios while they worked. Productivity through fair treatment instead of harsh discipline contradicted Wehrmacht experience. The prisoners discovered that American farmers openly discussed politics. FBI monitoring reports, declassified in the 1970s, noted that German POWs were astonished by farmers freely criticizing President Roosevelt and complaining about government policies without fear. In one documented incident at a farm near Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a U.S. Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell over crop allocation disputes. The farmer faced no consequences. Such defiance of authority would have meant death in Nazi Germany. Local newspapers across Texas documented interactions between German prisoners and American civilians. The Hearn Democrat, the Bryan Daily Eagle, and the Temple Daily Telegram published stories about prisoner work groups and community encounters. These contemporary accounts provide verification of the social interactions that so amazed the military prisoners. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported that German prisoners were taken on supervised Christmas shopping outings where they witnessed American teenage culture. Teenagers gathered at soda fountains in pharmacies, boys and girls together, unsupervised. They danced to jukebox music, including jazz and swing, which Nazi ideology had labeled as degenerate black music. They wore fashionable clothing despite the war, showing no militarization of youth culture. The behavior of American women particularly stunned the prisoners. Women drove trucks for the Hearn cottonseed oil plant, ran businesses on Main Street, and supervised male workers in defense plants. At the nearby Bryan Army Airfield, part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots program, female pilots flew military aircraft. Military records confirm that these pilots operated from Bryan Field between 1943 and 1944, visible to prisoner work details in surrounding areas. Churches throughout Robertson County invited German prisoners to services. Records from the First Baptist Church of Hearn, the First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church all document attendance by German POWs. The Hearn Democrat, on December 24, 1943, reported that German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services in multiple churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons were serving overseas. No incidents were reported. By early 1944, the Special Projects Division of the Office of the Provost Marshal General had established sophisticated educational operations at Camp Hearn. Declassified records reveal the scope of this secret re-education program, though the prisoners themselves knew it only as voluntary education. The camp library, initially stocked with 500 books donated by Herrn citizens, grew to more than 5,000 volumes by August 1944. The American Library Association's prisoner book program supplied texts that included works by German authors banned by the Nazis. The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, a famous anti-war novel, and works by Jewish authors. A German prisoner could now read books whose possession would have meant death in Nazi Germany. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, offered correspondence courses. University records show that 340 German prisoners of war enrolled in subjects such as English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural sciences between 1944 and 1945. Professors from the college visited Camp Herrn monthly to conduct lectures and exams. The camp newspaper requires clarification. While Der Ruf, The Call, was published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, the prisoners at Camp Herrn published their own paper called Der Spiegel, The Mirror. Preserved copies in the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center show its evolution from Nazi propaganda in early 1943 editions to democratic discussions by late 1944. Declassified documents from the Special Projects Division reveal a sophisticated psychological operation. The program identified 3 categories of prisoners: anti-Nazis, approximately 10%, non-political prisoners, 75%, and hardline Nazis, 15%. Each group received different treatment designed to maximize ideological transformation. The anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through careful screening, including analysis of letters, conversations, and reading choices, were granted additional privileges and education. They became barracks leaders, discussion moderators, and newspaper editors. Their influence over non-political prisoners was deliberately cultivated and closely monitored. The selection process, developed by Army psychologists and German immigrant advisors, included subtle testing. Prisoners' reactions to news of German defeats, their library book choices, participation in education programs, and social interactions were all documented. Weekly reports tracked ideological shifts across the camp population. The assistant executive officer, Major Maxwell McKnight, whose papers are preserved at the Hoover Institution, wrote in a November 1944 report that the rate of transformation exceeded expectations. Approximately 60% of non-political prisoners showed measurable movement toward democratic ideals after 6 months of exposure to American society and targeted education. Working in American facilities exposed prisoners to a casual abundance that felt like mockery of German scarcity. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, where prisoners handled materials beginning in September 1943, workers discarded more aluminum scrap in a single day than German aircraft factories could acquire in a week. Plant records show that German prisoners were assigned to scrap collection, giving them direct exposure to American industrial waste. Food processing plants produced the greatest psychological shock. At the Stokely Brothers canning plant in Cameron, Texas, verified through Milam County historical records as employing prisoners from nearby Camp Herrn, perfectly edible products were discarded for minor cosmetic defects. Slightly green tomatoes, irregular corn kernels, beans with tiny blemishes, all destroyed while German civilians faced starvation. A letter from prisoner Corporal Friedrich Müller, preserved in Red Cross archives, stated that hundreds of kilograms of fruit were destroyed that day because they didn't meet canning standards. Fruit that would be treasure in Germany is trash here. The American supervisor apologized to us for the waste, not realizing he was apologizing for an abundance we couldn't begin to imagine. Christmas 1943 at Camp Herrn is extensively documented in local newspapers, Red Cross reports, and military records. The entire town of Herrn, with a population of 2,000, mobilized to ensure that enemy prisoners had a proper Christmas celebration. Such a response to enemies defied every expectation of wartime behavior. The Herrn Democrat published a complete list of donations on December 23, 1943. Local churches collected 4,800 individual gift packages. Schools contributed handmade cards and decorations. American Legion Post 164, Veterans of the First World War who had fought against Germans donated cigarettes, candy, and sports equipment to current German enemies. The Lions Club provided musical instruments. The Garden Club decorated the camp with holly branches and evergreen leaves. The camp's Christmas tree, photographed for the newspaper, stood 30 feet tall in the main compound, decorated with electric lights that burned continuously. Quartermaster records show that the camp used more electricity for Christmas decorations than most German villages had for all purposes combined. Such an electrical display would have been unthinkable even in peacetime Germany. Local churches performed Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners. The choir of the First Methodist Church learned German carols phonetically. Mrs. Sarah Patterson, the choir director, whose son was serving in Italy, led the performance. The cognitive dissonance of American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their own sons fought Germans broke several prisoners emotionally. According to Guard reports, the Christmas feast menu, preserved in quartermaster records, included roast turkey, half a kilo per man, ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce, mincemeat pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted men, and California wine for officers. The meal totaled approximately 5,000 calories per person. Meanwhile, German civilian rations, when available, provided about 1,200 calories a day. Working in Texas exposed German prisoners to American racial dynamics that contradicted both Nazi propaganda and America's own reputation. The documented reality in military reports and local newspapers was far more complex than either narrative suggested. At Camp Hearn, black soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment occasionally served as guards. The German prisoners, products of Nazi racial ideology, found themselves receiving orders from black Americans. Several prisoners requested transfers rather than submit to black authority. Their requests were denied by camp administration. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles wrote in a December 1943 report that German prisoners' objections to black guards were noted and ignored. Yet the prisoners also witnessed the contradictions of segregation. They could eat in restaurants in Hearn that refused service to the black soldiers guarding them. They could attend movie theaters where their guards were not allowed to sit in the main section. In some contexts, German enemies enjoyed more social freedom than American citizens who happened to be black. This paradox, being treated better than some Americans while still enemies, shattered their ideological certainty. In agricultural work sites documented by the Farm Security Administration, prisoners labored alongside Mexican American and black workers. The efficiency of racially mixed work teams focused on tasks rather than race-challenged Nazi theories that racial purity equaled productivity. German prisoners picked cotton beside black laborers who outperformed them, undermining assumptions of racial superiority. 3 well-documented cases illustrate the transformation of German prisoners in America. Herman Butcher arrived at Camp Hearn in June 1943 as a committed Nazi. His memoirs describe a gradual ideological collapse through accumulated observations. The turning point came at Christmas, 1943, when Hearn citizens gave gifts to enemy prisoners. He wrote, "These people, whose sons we had tried to kill, gave us presents. Their kindness was not weakness, but strength. The confidence of victors who knew they had already won not only the war but the peace to follow." Butcher emigrated to America in 1953, became a citizen in 1958, and worked as an engineer for General Motors, the great American automobile company, until his retirement. Georg Geithner escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico, in September 1945, living under the assumed name Dennis Wiles for 40 years. Instead of fleeing the country, he chose to remain illegally in America, marrying an American woman, raising children, and working as a tennis instructor in California. When he finally surrendered in 1985 for a television documentary, he had been American longer than he had been German. His story, told in his autobiography Hitler's Last Soldier in America, validates the transformative power of American society. Reinhold Pabel escaped from Camp Washington, Illinois, in 1945, not due to mistreatment, but out of boredom and curiosity about American life. According to his memoir, Enemies Are Human, he lived illegally in Chicago for 7 years, working in bookstores and marrying an American woman before voluntarily surrendering in 1953. The FBI investigation revealed that he had broken no laws except illegal entry. He gained U.S. citizenship in 1959 and became a successful businessman, later sponsoring other German immigrants. The experience of German prisoners varied across more than 500 camps in America, but consistent patterns emerged. Camp Alva, Oklahoma, specialized in agricultural training. Department of Agriculture records show that German prisoners managed an 80-hectare demonstration farm using American techniques. They learned mechanized cultivation, crop rotation, soil conservation, and hybrid seed development, skills that proved invaluable when they returned to a devastated Germany. The camp's agricultural program was so successful that local farmers competed to hire prisoner work crews at premium wages. Camp Concordia, Kansas, became famous for its art program. German prisoners of war created murals that still exist in the Stone County Courthouse and several local buildings. The camp orchestra, equipped with instruments donated by Kansas communities, performed concerts for civilian audiences. The Concordia Blade newspaper reviewed these concerts favorably, noting the professional quality of the enemy musicians. Art created by prisoners now forms part of permanent collections in Kansas museums. Camp Trinidad, Colorado, faced unique challenges, with winter temperatures reaching -20 degrees Celsius. Quartermaster records show that the Army provided German prisoners with Arctic-grade clothing, insulated barracks, and increased caloric rations, 4,000 calories per day during the winter. Swiss Inspector André Poncho noted in February 1944 that German prisoners in Trinidad received better winter provisions than Wehrmacht troops on the Eastern Front, the terrible battlefield in Russia, according to the prisoners' own admissions. Perhaps nothing stunned German military minds more than the transparency of American information. Prisoners had access to American newspapers that criticized the war effort, revealed production problems, and discussed strategic failures. The Special Projects Division deliberately provided diverse news sources, knowing that exposure to a free press would undermine totalitarian thinking. Radio programs available in recreation halls featured critical commentary about military leadership. Comedians like Bob Hope mocked generals and politicians. Journalists such as Edward R. Murrow questioned strategies. Congress, the American Parliament, debated military appropriations publicly, with dissenting opinions broadcast nationwide. All of this was accessible to enemy prisoners. The 1944 presidential election campaign, observed from the camps, looked like democratic suicide to German military minds. Roosevelt faced a serious challenge from Thomas Dewey during wartime. The Republicans, the opposition party, criticized the administration's handling of the war. Newspapers published opposing viewpoints. Political cartoons mocked the commander-in-chief. Yet the war effort continued, even strengthened. This demonstration of democracy's strength through discord, rather than in spite of it, fundamentally challenged authoritarian assumptions. Inspection reports from the International Red Cross, available in Red Cross archives in Geneva, consistently rated American prisoner of war camps above Geneva Convention requirements. These neutral evaluations provide crucial verification of camp conditions. Inspector Guy Matroe wrote in his comprehensive August 1944 report that American camps exceed treaty requirements in every category. Food rations equal or surpass those of U.S. military personnel. Medical care is equivalent to that of American military hospitals. Educational and recreational opportunities surpass those of many American training facilities. Specific inspection findings from Camp Hearn included daily caloric intake of between 3,300 and 3,800 calories when the Geneva Convention required 2,000, living space of 12 square meters per man when the convention required 8, medical staffing of 1 doctor per 500 prisoners when the convention required 1 per 1,000, recreation with organized sports, libraries, and educational programs when the convention merely required adequate recreation. Inspector Emil Sandstrom compared American camps favorably with those of other nations. Having inspected prisoner facilities in Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, I can state definitively that American camps provide superior conditions. The distinction is not only material but philosophical. Americans treat prisoners as temporarily displaced people rather than as enemies. Prisoners working in American factories observed production methods that revolutionized their understanding of industrial efficiency. At the Lone Star Steel plant in Dangerfield, Texas, where prisoners from Camp Hearn worked from 1944 to 1945, monthly output exceeded the entire annual production of the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland, before the Allied bombings. The secret was not just machinery, it was motivation. Company records show that workers competed for production bonuses, suggested efficiency improvements, and took pride in performance. Charts displayed each shift's output like sports scores. Workers wore company badges, bought war bonds with overtime pay, and painted bomber names on steel destined for military use. Morale drove productivity more than supervision. In Texas rail yards, where prisoners loaded materials, the coordination amazed German logistics officers. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad employed prisoners in its Smithville yard, where they witnessed American logistical efficiency. Trains arrived on precise schedules. Loading teams operated continuously. Telegraph and telephone systems coordinated transport on a national scale. No central planning committee, just capitalism organizing itself for the war effort. When Germany collapsed in the spring of 1945, American authorities prepared prisoners to return to a devastated homeland. This preparation, documented in occupation planning records, went beyond simple repatriation. The War Department launched Project Paperclip for scientists, but also broader programs to prepare prisoners to rebuild a democratic Germany. Courses in civil administration trained prisoners to manage destroyed cities. Agricultural training emphasized feeding starving populations. Medical personnel learned public health techniques for epidemic prevention. Engineers studied infrastructure reconstruction. The Special Projects Division identified potential democratic leaders among prisoners, providing additional training in governance and administration. The scale of preparation is documented in reports from the Chief of the Prisoner of War Service. By May 1945, 31,000 prisoners were enrolled in vocational training, 18,000 studying English, 12,000 in agricultural programs, 8,500 in technical courses, and 6,200 in business administration. The future concepts of the Marshall Plan, the American economic aid program to rebuild Europe, were explained to prisoners before the public announcement. State Department officials visited camps, explaining America's intention to rebuild rather than punish Germany. This incomprehensible generosity, from victor to vanquished, shattered the final remnants of Nazi ideology about racial struggle and survival of the fittest. The numbers document the scope of the transformation. Out of 425,000 German prisoners in America, only 2,222 escape attempts occurred, 0.052%. Only 54 successful escapes lasting more than 30 days, 0.01%. Acts of sabotage, 7 confirmed cases, 0.001%. Work refusals, 178 documented incidents, 0.04%. Voluntary labor participation, 87% of eligible prisoners. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities found that 74% of repatriated prisoners held favorable opinions of American democracy. 61% supported Marshall Plan aid when it was announced. 55% advocated a German-American alliance. 38% expressed a desire to immigrate to America. 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Immigration records show that 5,000 former prisoners legally immigrated to the United States during the 1950s. Naturalization records indicate that 92% became citizens within the eligible time frame. Their American success rate, measured by employment, home ownership, and lack of criminal record, surpassed that of general immigrant populations. The influence of returned prisoners on the reconstruction of West Germany is documented in occupation records and German archives. Former POWs held significant positions in the new democracy. 48 became members of the Bundestag, the German parliament. 312 served as mayors or city council members. 1,847 worked in agricultural modernization. 2,341 taught in reconstituted schools, and 4,165 managed businesses using American methods. Hans-Georg von Studnitz, a former prisoner and later German industrialist, told American historians in 1965, "We returned from America with more than memories. We brought knowledge of how democracy works, how free markets operate, how diverse peoples cooperate. We had seen the future, and we knew it worked." Camp Herne closed in December 1945, but the connections endured. The Herne Heritage League maintains archives of correspondence from former prisoners spanning 40 years. Christmas cards arrived annually until the last known prisoner died in 2001. These letters document sustained transformation rather than temporary influence. In 1984, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, the Great Allied invasion of France, 50 former Camp Herne prisoners returned to Texas. The Herne Democrat covered the reunion extensively. Former enemies embraced former guards. Veterans of the Wehrmacht, the German army, laid flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking for the group, said, "We arrived as enemies, believing in racial superiority and national destiny. We left as friends, understanding that the chaos of democracy is its strength, that diversity creates, rather than weakens, unity." Historians have extensively documented the experience of German prisoners in America. These scholarly works, based on archives, interviews, and government records, confirm the scale and success of the transformation. The consensus is that America's treatment of German prisoners represents the most successful re-education effort in history, achieved through exposure rather than indoctrination. The German prisoners who arrived in America between 1943 and 1946 witnessed scenes that seemed impossible within their worldview. Every casual freedom, every small kindness, every bewildering act of generosity accumulated into ideological transformation. They had expected to find a weak and divided nation. Instead, they discovered a society so confident that it could afford mercy toward its enemies. The transformation was not achieved through propaganda, but through reality. The German prisoners saw democracy functioning through apparent chaos. They observed racial integration progressing despite segregation. They saw women exercising authority while maintaining femininity. They experienced enemies becoming friends through simple humanity. These ordinary yet extraordinary images, mundane to Americans, but revolutionary to products of totalitarianism, accomplished what military defeat alone could not: complete ideological transformation. The prisoners did not merely witness American power, they experienced American values. They did not just observe democracy, they participated in it. America's greatest victory was not on battlefields, but in prison camps, where enemies became advocates through the simple act of witnessing American reality. The images that stunned them were only unusual to eyes trained by tyranny. To American eyes, they were simply life, messy, imperfect, but free. The German prisoners came expecting to find enemies. Instead, they found mirrors of what they themselves could become. Those unusual images changed not only individual prisoners, but the trajectory of nations. In their astonished observation lay the seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Europe. Their transformation proves that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration, not through propaganda, but through reality, not through hatred, but through humanity. And so, former Nazi soldiers who came to America as prisoners became the greatest ambassadors of democracy the world has ever known.